Okay, before we start on the third part, the third section, which looks at actually who was the winner of the Cuban Missile Crisis, I just like to point out about the SBQ potential topics here. The first one would be more or less who was actually responsible for starting the Cuban Missile Crisis. I think you also need to be aware as well, just in case they were tricky about it and they ask you about who was responsible for increasing tensions during the Cuban Missile Crisis. Then, although that I haven't really come across an SBQ of that nature, but doesn't mean to say that it's not possible to come out SBQ regarding that one, right? And also the next one, the more common one would be were the who was the victor, okay, for the Cuban Missile Crisis. Okay, that is also another common one that you would see it coming out in one of my practices as well. Alright, so moving on. Alright, there's a picture of JFK's son as well as Khrushchev's son, I think, if I'm not wrong. Okay, at this after, of course, after the crisis has happened and after it's resolved, we look back at this as part of history that we will remember because it brought the world to the brink of nuclear crisis. Okay, it's a bit noisy here. I hope you're not hearing this in the recording because renovation near the school, construction works near the school. All right. Okay, so throughout the course of the resolution of the crisis, the last part of it, we're going to be looking at these few things: Khrushchev's first letter, Khrushchev's second letter, impact of the U-2 spy plane incident, Khrushchev accepting Kennedy's deal, and finally the removal of the missiles, which actually ends the crisis. So after the naval blockade, there was again pretty much silence between the two sides and just wait and see approach to see what will happen. Just imagine these few days if you were a citizen of America, you would be shitting your pants. Because basically the leaders are not doing anything, you would have no idea what's going on. You have no idea if there were any going to be any missiles that's going to be firing your way. So basically you're just waiting to see what actually happens. You can either be incredibly calm or you can be incredibly scared about what's going to happen. So the first letter actually arrives only on the give you some time to try to recall, letter on 26th. Okay, so on the 26th of October they actually sent the first letter, and the first letter actually indicates that he would be offering to withdraw the missiles in exchange for USA's promise not to attack Cuba. So actually, this letter is very mild, and USA can actually, just give in so-called pretty easily without losing the missiles in Turkey. However, Castro decided that, hey, screw it, if you are going to play ball with USA, I'm not going to play ball with you. If anybody still continues to come and use spy planes to, take photographs of us, I'm going to shoot them down. And he's going to increase the building of the missile site and at a faster pace so that the missile sites would be ready in the event that USA do decide to invade anyway. But before USA can actually respond to the first letter, remember they took such a long time discussing and finally deciding on what to do. Similarly, they will need some time to actually try to find out what they want to do. And so Khrushchev sends a second letter on 27th of October, and in this letter he asked for the removal of the missiles in Turkey. And so in exchange for the missiles in Cuba, a removal of the missiles in Cuba as well. Okay, and in the meantime, Castro continues to prepare for war. And because of this second letter, he also wrote a letter to Khrushchev arguing for a first strike against the USA, saying that we should go in hard. And remember, all this point in time, Castro is really more like a pawn in this entire game. Pawn, P-A-W-N. Okay, he's not that important, but he is concerned about his own country's safety and security. If USA were to continue to invade them, they would have a very hard time, and that was what he was trying to prevent as well. So with these two letters, right, when it came, United States decided to actually only respond to the first letter and conveniently ignoring the second letter. They actually did some kind of investigation to this particular letters, and it came to the conclusion that it could have been that Khrushchev was overthrown and that now the hardliner governments, that means to say those who are insistent on taking a hard stance against the USA, were now in power, in control of the Soviet Union, and they decided to actually be more demanding. So they analyzed so-called the handwriting, the language and everything, and they decided that that was really the case. Okay, read that somewhere. I don't think it's found inside your textbook. Okay. No, however, very unfortunately, the next thing that's going to happen is actually the U-2 spy plane incident. Okay, U-2 is the type of the spy plane, not the band U-2. And with this, at this point in time, the USA have been continuing to send spy planes over Cuba. The primary reason is because they are still considering if they need to launch an airstrike against Cuba. If they were to do so, they need to know exactly where the missile sites are, and therefore they will continue to send these spy planes over USA. Cuba. And unfortunately, in this particular incident, they sent a spy plane over Cuba, and Cuba shot it down, and the pilot actually died. So for both Kennedy and Khrushchev, they were actually very alarmed by this development because they realized that they couldn't control things on the ground anymore. Soviet Union has no control over Castro. Castro can do whatever he likes, and he has absolutely no control over that. So both leaders actually wanted to reach an agreement as fast as possible. Now, as we are starting this entire chapter, you will realize that we only have access to more or less what Kennedy was deciding to do and thinking what he wants to do, and we hardly have any idea of what Khrushchev wants to do. I think it's very clear, however, to see and to be able to infer that Khrushchev as well does not want to start a nuclear war. Okay, of course, he might end up losing face about it, but the very key thing here is that you are alive as a result of not allowing the war to start, and I think that's more important than saving face here, lah. Of course, if you can achieve both, that would be awesome, and that's what the two leaders actually do try to come to an agreement. Okay, so at the same time, Kennedy also does not want to actually promise Khrushchev that he wants to remove the missiles in Turkey, because if he removes that, he would be increasing tensions in NATO, whatever you want to call it, okay? The North Atlantic Treaty Organization, of which Turkey is a member, because he does not want to be seen as bowing to pressure to the enemy. Again, about the face thing here. So yeah, as much as they do not want to actually start a nuclear war, they must consider their, the pride and of the country that is at stake here as well. So, faced with a war-hungry Castro, Khrushchev decides that if any rash actions were continued to be taken by Castro, it would jeopardize the negotiations, and so Khrushchev accepted USA's response to remove the offensive missiles from Cuba. Kennedy also agreed to remove the missiles in Turkey, but only 6 months later, and this was a secret deal not made known to a lot of people, because it does not, it saves the USA some space. So 6 months later, after that, they remove the missiles. They will say, oh no, it's got nothing to do with the crisis. There's absolutely no link. These missiles are old anyway. We're just doing some spring cleaning, getting rid of the missiles, and that's what is expected to happen now. Okay, so that's why the deal was made secret, and it was Robert Kennedy. This is where you have to take note as well. The president, I know throughout this entire lecture I haven't mentioned it. If you have been listening all this while, it's good, then you will also remember this. The president is John F. Kennedy, John Fitzgerald Kennedy, and his brother is also one of those who were heavily involved in the negotiations, and his brother is Robert Kennedy. Okay, I got mentioned before also, right, how the Kennedys always keep dying. Just go and Kennedy's dying. I'm sure you'll be able to find a few articles about how John F. Kennedy was assassinated, and how Robert Kennedy was assassinated, how John F. Kennedy's, I think, son died in a plane accident or something like that. Yeah, many Kennedys dying over the place, so go look out for that as well if you're interested. So after Khrushchev accepts Kennedy's deal, he removes the missiles in in Cuba, and finally the crisis comes to an end. Okay, what Khrushchev actually did was to remove the long-range missiles, but he did not remove the short-range missiles, as those were not actually part of the agreement. Castro was pissed off at Khrushchev because he didn't consult him at all. But again, like I mentioned, Castro is a pawn in all this. Okay, it was mainly a crisis between USA and Soviet Union, and it only came to an end when they realized that they couldn't really control Castro. So therefore, you can see that they were not very important to this entire crisis at all, to at least the United States and Soviet Union. Okay, and the remaining missiles were seen to be a danger to if they were to remain in Castro's hands. So eventually, these missiles were also removed by 22nd of November. All right, and so finally, with all the missiles gone, of course not only in 22nd October that the crisis ended. The crisis ended much earlier, and after announcing that these missiles were to be removed, finally the crisis comes to an end. I think I'm repeating myself here. All right, so that that brings us to the end of the crisis itself. But we are going to be moving on. I will put this into another lecture about the factors leading to the resolution of the crisis. What actually did help to resolve the crisis, and what is the impact after that, and who actually did win the crisis, came out as so-called the winner of the crisis. All right. So let's move on to the next and hopefully last lecture.